Okay. I just need to... No. Go live. Can't even... No, that's not working either. Weird. Okay. Can you... Weird. Okay. Can you... Weird. Okay. Hear me? Yes. Can you... I can hear me. There we go. What about now? What about the video? I mean, sorry, what about the audio? Is the echo stopped now? Okay, well, I hadn't switched to this camera. Can you see me now? Yes, okay, excellent. It was a little confusing. I upgraded it to a new version of OBS, and I wonder if that was causing part of the problems. Anyway, I'm here now. Apologies for people watching the recording. I don't know how it's going to play out, but we will do our best. I'm actually going to turn off the... I'm not going to be able to see the chat the whole time. Part of the problem was I had the chat open, and I think that was what was causing the echo. I have muted it now, but because of the delay, it's slightly weird. So I'm actually going to turn that off. My apologies if I'm not active in the chat, but I'm sure the rest of you can take care of that. Okay, so anyway, as I was saying, what we try to do in these videos is give an update on things that have been going on in the last month or two or three at the Digital Tolkien Project, all the stuff that's been going on, just so you sort of have a sense of all the things that are happening. And I've got quite a bit to talk about today. I want to start off just briefly talking about the website. And last update that I did back in January of this year, I talked a little bit towards the end about sort of thinking of a taxonomy of all the various things that the Digital Tolkien Project does and how to present it and so on. And one of the things that we did as a result of that sort of discussion and taxonomy and so on was a complete rewrite of this Subprojects page. And so if you go to the Subprojects page, I'll just get rid of myself so we can focus on this page. This outlines almost everything that we're working on. And you may recall, if you saw the January video, that we sort of split it up into data projects and the website and software tools as three distinct categories. And within data projects, we've got stuff that relates directly to Tolkien's mythopoeic works, then also stuff relating to Tolkien's life, and then the larger ecosystem of Tolkien studies. And this page has sort of an outline of all of that stuff, including an amazing contribution from Jenny Starstuff of links to time codes in videos where these various things get talked about. So if you're interested, in sort of what's going on, projects you might be able to get involved in, sub-projects you might be able to get involved in, this is a great way of kind of getting an overview of everything and so on. But I still felt that this was a little bit overwhelming if you just wanted a kind of quick overview rather than having to scroll through all this. So one of the changes that I made quite recently is on the home page, if you scroll down, I now have this sort of handy table that outlines all of the various things that we're doing. And each of these is a link back into that sub-projects page. So you can still get all that information very easily, but this nicely lays it out to give you a kind of bird's eye view of the various things that the Tolkien Project are doing. So hopefully that's helpful to people, especially newcomers to the project, people that are wanting to orient themselves in terms of the various things that we're doing and the things that they can get involved in. The next thing I want to briefly mention is, of course, those of you who are Tolkien Society members will know that the Tolkien Society Award shortlist came out earlier this week. And I encourage everyone who is a Tolkien Society member, if you haven't already put in your votes, definitely do check this out. If you're not a Tolkien Society member, please consider joining the Tolkien Society. And as always, this is just a wonderful selection of sort of what the things that are going on went on in the Tolkien community last year. I really like the changes that have been made this year in terms of more transparency around the number of nominations that were submitted, and sort of how the nominees were shortlisted from that list and so on. So they've now added details of who the panelists were for each category, best artwork, best article, best book, and so on, and then best online content. And of course, I'm extremely proud that the Digital Tolkien Project is shortlisted again this year. All of the nominees are absolute shortlisters, absolutely phenomenal. And I would endorse every single one of them. There's some fantastic projects here. And I certainly encourage everyone to put in your vote if you're a member, or consider joining the Tolkien Society if you aren't already a member. Okay, next thing that I want to talk about, and it is, I've got no visibility into whether you can hear and see me because I did turn off the chat. So I hope everything is going okay. And that you can see me and everything. Unfortunately, OBS still thinks it's the chat is the previous chat. So but I'm just going to keep going with it and hope that it all turns out for the best. The next thing I want to talk about, though, is Rimbë. For those of you who are not aware, Rimbë is the platform that I developed for doing text annotations and crowdsourcing text annotations of the text of Tolkien in particular. And the main original motivation, it's been around for about a year now, is in particular annotations at a paragraph level of the characters, locations, and eventually time and date and so on for everything that's going on in initially Lord of the Rings, but also The Hobbit, The Silmarillion, and so on. There's some other stuff that we're using it for in Tolkien's own life as well. You can see mention of the J.R. Tolkien Companion and Guide there. But the main focus has been going through every single paragraph in Lord of the Rings and annotating what characters are present in the narrative mainline, what location they are, and then soon we're going to be doing time and date and stuff like that. I want to give a huge shout out to Robin and Lisa and Ken in particular, who have continued to work through and done an incredible job. Robin especially has just been phenomenal in going through and doing all this annotation. One thing that I added last night was a calculation of some statistics around where we're at in terms of the annotation. And so when we're annotating, I mentioned going through one paragraph at a time. Sometimes they're not paragraphs, sometimes they're stanzas of poetry or something like that. So the more generic term that we use is chunk. And so each of these texts has a certain number of chunks. Fellowship of the Ring, for example, has 3,161 chunks. They may be paragraphs, they may be headings, they may be stanzas of verse or something like that. And of those so far, 97.2% of them have characters marked. 95.8% of them have locations marked. We also have a bunch of narratorial flags that we're going through, marking whether the paragraphs are happening in real time or whether they're summarizing something or whether they're giving background information, that kind of stuff. And then ultimately we're also segmenting it into scenes. And you can see then so this is just an indication of how many of the chunks in a particular volume or work have been annotated. I just want to point out a caveat. This does not mean we're 97.2% done with the characters in the Fellowship of the Ring, because one of the things that we did was automatically kick off the character annotation by using the speaker identification information that we worked on in 2023. So back in 2023, a group of people, including Pat Lusk and Maureen Dillon and Sarah Monnier, went through and identified all of the speakers whenever there was direct speech in the text, who was the speaker. And when I started Rimbë, one of the first things I did was use that information to sort of pre-populate the characters that are present, because if they're speaking, then they're present for the most part. So these numbers don't necessarily mean we've gone through like 95.9% of paragraphs in Return of the King and added all the characters. We still need to go through and add the characters that aren't speaking in that particular paragraph but are present in the scene. But still, this is an absolutely phenomenal job. I mean, the fact that these numbers are so high for location and flag and scene and so on for Fellowship of the Ring, we're making a ton of progress. And so in the coming months, I'm hoping I'll actually be able to show some visualizations of exactly what's going on there. We'll be able to do things like tie locations of the Fellowship to map between maps and exact paragraphs, be able to get all sorts of interesting statistics about when the characters are in the scenes and so on, which is really interesting from a narratological point of view and searching for things and so on. Not that it's particular interest for those of you who aren't actually using Rimbë, but for those of you who are doing annotations, I'm doing a lot of work at the moment sort of reorganizing stuff. There's a lot that we've learnt over the last year as to how this stuff should work, and there's a lot of internal work going on. And I recently added some search capabilities as well, so it's easy to sort of search where particular words are used and so on. That's it for Rimbë. This is if you're wanting a sub-project to contribute to within the Digital Tolkien Project, and you want to spend a lot of time really closely reading and having lots of discussions about what it means for a character to be in the scene or not in the scene, and working out how locations relate to one another from the description of the text, getting involved in that's a really good way to go. So I encourage you to just mention in the Discord if you are interested in helping out with some of this sort of character location, scene, narratological annotation in Lord of the Rings. Do let us know. And there's a lot of work still to do just in terms of checking stuff as well. So what we're trying to do is not just have one person look at each paragraph, but have multiple people verify that the information is correct. And there'll be a ton of stuff that we can do with that data as we get closer to finishing. I just realized that I wasn't showing when I was showing the stats, I wasn't actually showing them. So these are the stats that I was meant to be showing before. And as you can see, we've got really high numbers on the Fellowship of the Ring. And we'll get there. We'll get there with the rest of the stuff. Okay. The next thing that I want to talk about is a new thing that I've been working on very recently that I have actually wanted to do for a long, long time. And that is take the information that we've been annotating the text with around not what location the narrative is taking place in, but just locations that are mentioned in the text. We did a bunch of work really early on, Chiara Palladino and myself, marking up any time a name was mentioned in the text, whether it's the name of a person or a place or something else. And what we've been doing recently is taking that information. This is something, again, that Jenny Starstuff has been working on, is mapping those names to the actual places that they represent, because obviously places go by multiple names. People go by multiple names too. And so ultimately, it's not enough just to know that a particular name was used. If you're interested in when a particular place is mentioned, you need to consider all of the names that place can have. And so there's some mapping to be done there that Jenny's been doing. But for a long time, I've thought about how we can tie that then to maps. If we have digital maps that have locations on them represented, then we can actually tie them together with the text. And this is a little prototype that I built recently. And of course, I had to try it on chapter 14 of the published Silmarillion of Beleriand and its realms. And so what we have on the left-hand side is the text of Beleriand and its realms. And on the right, well, I can show there's a list of places here. I'll start off with the places. I'll come to the map in a moment. But as you scroll through the text, the various names of places that get mentioned become highlighted, both in the text itself and on the right-hand side with information about those places. So at any point in the text where you're reading, you can get an instant lookup of information about the place. And of course, the real power of this is that then it can be tied to a map. So if I go back to a map here, we can see this is just in the sort of northwestern part of well, it's not even Beleriand technically. Beleriand is south of here. But as you scroll up, you'll see that as names of places are mentioned, they become highlighted in the map. So it makes it very easy. This is something I wanted to do for a long time, is sort of these very dynamic maps, where rather than just showing you being overwhelmed by all of Beleriand, just the names of the places that are being talked about are shown. So this is a little prototype that I built that I'm really looking forward to sort of building out. Obviously, this is not something I can publicly share in terms of reading environment like this without permission from the estate and HarperCollins and so on. But this is sort of a prototype of the vision of what we might be able to do. You know, as Nevrust gets talked about, Nevrust fades in and so on. Another thing you can do here is you can pick particular, if you click on Hithlum here, it actually highlights Hithlum. You can go to the map as well and highlight certain things, and it'll get highlighted in the text. So this is just sort of showing a vision that I've had for a while of how, by having annotated texts where the names are mapped to actual place data, and the place data has location, like map coordinates and so on, then we can do this kind of visualization in a really dynamic way that I think is really exciting. And so part of all this is, of course, building a database of the shapes of the various places and so on. And again, this is a way that people could definitely contribute if you're interested in this sort of stuff, is helping. What I've been doing, I can just toggle this underlay and you'll see what I've been doing is basically taking Christopher's map and using that as the basis for where I draw things. But there's a lot of fiddly work here in terms of kind of working out the coordinates of various things on this map to enable this kind of visualization. Of course, all of this relates really nicely to the Linked Open Data project. So one of the things that we will do as we continue to build out this database of places, along with the shapes on the map, that's something that will all be published as part of the Linked Open Data project. Okay, the next thing that I want to talk about is the Tolkien Glossary, which is something that I continue to be super excited about, but have not done a ton of work on for a little while. Let me just make it a little bigger, and I'll talk a little bit about the Tolkien Glossary. For those of you who are not familiar, the Tolkien Glossary came out of a realization that so much of what we were doing at the Digital Tolkien Project involved needing to have information about individual words. Whether it's that you're studying the different way that different characters speak, or you're wanting to know when, even the stuff I was just mentioning about different places having different names, different characters having different names, wanting to study when Elvish languages are used, whether they're used more in one place than another, whether you're interested in doing things like identifying when alliteration is used. That requires knowing how words are pronounced and so on. So there's a lot of things that we want to do where at the end of the day, what's important is having information at the word level. Even things like part of speech, whether it's a verb or a noun or an adjective or something, if you're wanting to do something like get a list of all of the adjectives that Frodo uses, then obviously part of that is knowing what words are spoken by Frodo, which is what the Speaker Identification Project in 2023 accomplished. But then you need to know what are the adjectives. And so this Tolkien Glossary was intended to be a kind of an overarching database of word level information. Etymology as well. Does Tolkien use Germanic words more in some places than Latinate words? In order to determine that, you need to know what words are Germanic, what words are Latinate. And the Tolkien Glossary is intended to be the place that we gather all of that information to answer all sorts of research questions. So one of the things, so I cut a long story short, we're back working on the Tolkien Glossary, and I'll show a couple of things that I've been working on and mention some things that are coming up as well, one thing in particular. So one thing that we've had for a while, actually right from the beginning, is if you look up a particular word, we have these what are called rug plots, where you basically get this little fibre sticking up any time that a particular word appears. And so you can take any word, any of the 18,000 words that appear in the Silmarillion, The Hobbit, and Lord of the Rings, including the prologue and appendices, and you can see where that word appears visually. And so you can see here, quite remarkably, Frodo does get mentioned a couple of times in Book 3 and Book 5, but not much compared to the extent to which the name is mentioned. Now, I want to emphasize again, this is just the name being mentioned, literally the letters F-R-O-D-O mentioned in the text. And so this complements quite nicely the work that we're doing in Rimbë of establishing when the character is in the scene. When is Frodo actually there in the narrative mainline? This is just where the word appears. Now, one of the features of the Tolkien Glossary, in addition to finding the number of times that the word's used and where the word's used and so on, we have these tags. And this is really, we're just sort of starting this. There's going to be a lot more tags in the future, but tags can be used for anything from marking what words have contractions, what words are in Sindarin or Quenya. We have things like what words are talked about in the Ring of Words book, the Peter Gilliver et al. Book. We have also vocabulary levels. So what words are different levels of vocabulary. So if you want to see what are the sort of more obscure, difficult words that are used versus the simple words, all of that's been tagged so far. And we're going to continue to do more and more tagging. We're wanting to do a lot of stuff around semantic domains, so things like plants and botanical terms or astronomical terms. One thing that Pat Lusk and I did a while ago that I still need to get in here is Gollumisms, words that are specific to the way Gollum speaks and so on. Right? These are all ways of tagging words so you can find those categories of words. One thing that we haven't had, though, that I thought for a long time would be useful is those rug plots, that visualization of where things occur, not at the individual word level, but at the tag level. Where do words with particular tags appear? And so that's actually something that I worked on last night, just in time for this. So if we take something like initial consonant loss, so these are words like E, L, M, E, and U, and you can see now we're not plotting where just one of these words appear, but where any of these words appear. So if you're wanting to see if there are any trends around this particular linguistic phenomenon of dropping an initial consonant, you can get this visualization of where they occur. And related to this, one thing that I also added yesterday, those rectangles underneath the fibers of the rug, if you like, are indicating the chapters. But you kind of have to count, which chapter is this? So one of the things I did yesterday was now when you hover over these, you can see in the left just underneath it, it tells you the chapter. So you can see exactly, if you're wondering, what's this chapter in Return of the King that has a tremendous number of these initial consonants being dropped? And you can see it's 608, which is the Scouring of the Shire. And I will actually I haven't done this yet, but I will put the chapter name there so you don't have to remember that 608 is the Scouring of the Shire. But it's really interesting to see that the only chapter that has this initial consonant loss in Return of the King is the Scouring of the Shire. And that's obviously very deliberate in that when they go back to the Shire, that's where they're speaking with this particular dialect. And you also get other things as well, like at the end of you get some at the end of Book 4 where it's the presumably the orcs doing it and so on. We'll tie this in again with the speaker identification information at some point too, so you can actually easily see who the speakers are. But this is really exciting to me because this is an example where we're going way beyond what's possible with just searching for a word. and were categorizing words by various criteria, and then being able to see in sort of a larger scale where those linguistic features or semantic features or etymological features eventually where they appear in the text. I'll just give one other example, like NT contraction. Many of you are familiar with work I did a while ago about when do not is contracted to don't. And this now enables us to start to do that kind of work, not just for one contraction, but all contractions. So here we get this nice visualization of where contractions NT, where not is being contracted to N''T across all the works. You can see it never happens in the Silmarillion. The Silmarillion is absent here because there is no place in the Silmarillion where you get a not contracted to NT. But you can see again that it appears throughout The Hobbit, except in chapter 10. There happens not to be any there, or maybe there isn't any in chapter 14 either. You go to the Fellowship of the Ring. Book 1 has more than Book 2, although it's still represented in Book 2. But then you get to the Two Towers, and Book 3 has entire chapters with no contraction at all. I haven't looked into detail in this, but certainly in the case of the do not to don't, no one in Rohan or Gondor ever contract. So that I think in large part explains why there's large chunks of Book 3 and Book 5 where there are no contractions. But again, notice what happens. You get a lot. It's interesting. You get a lot more in 601, and of course in the Scouring of the Shire is another place where the contractions really come back. So this is not yet deployed. It'll be deployed hopefully later today, but this is an exciting new feature that the glossary is getting. One other thing that I can't show you yet, but I will get to soon, is I have done some initial pronunciation calculation. That's the right term. I've run the entire list of words, the 18,000, 19,000 words across the Silmarillion, Hobbit, and Lord of the Rings. I've run them through some software that produces a IPA, International Phonetic Alphabet, pronunciation guide for the words. And it works really... it took me a while to find one that does British English. There are lots that do American English, but I needed the British... I wanted the British pronunciation. So I found some software that did this. I ran it through over the 19,000 words. For English words, it gets it almost perfectly right. And so what remains is to go through and correct things like the Old English and Elvish pronunciations and so on. One of the things I'll do for the Elvish pronunciation is, some of you may be aware that I have a Python library called Arda that does some date stuff, but it also does syllabification and stress markings on Elvish words. I'll extend that to do pronunciation as well. So eventually, every single word in the Tolkien glossary will have a pronunciation guide that will work for both English and Old English and the Elvish languages and Khuzdul and all that kind of stuff. That'll be interesting just in terms of if you want to look up how a word's pronounced, but it's also going to enable some interesting research into things like rhyme and alliteration. And what I will probably do after I've corrected some of these sort of Elvish pronunciations and so on is tag words based on like their rhyme category, their rhyme class or their alliteration class. And that will enable you for any word in the glossary to immediately find all the other words that rhyme with that word. And there's all sorts of interesting things we're going to be able to do with the Tolkien Poetry site, therefore, and then as well in terms of finding rhymes, but then also alliteration, right? By putting things in alliteration classes. That's not so much interesting in terms of what are the words that alliterate with this word, because that's trivial. That's for the most part with some minor nuances. That's just starting with the same letter. But what that's going to enable is more accurate detection of alliteration in the texts. Obviously, where Tolkien was explicitly writing alliterative poetry, we know that there's alliteration in the Lay of the Children of Hurin, for example. That's the whole point of it. Every line will have some alliteration. But it's not so much about discovering that, although we can do that once we've added the pronunciation to the Tolkien glossary. It's also identifying alliteration just in prose. There are many cases where Tolkien adopts alliterative techniques just in his prose writing. And that's something that I've wanted to work on for a while. I know there's been some work that people like Joe Hoffman have done as well. But what we really need underlying all of that is just a database of all the words in Tolkien and how they're pronounced. And that's going to be coming to the Tolkien glossary soon. Okay, that's, I think, all I wanted to say about the glossary. So let me now move on to another thing that the idea of which goes back a couple of years, but I'm just finally getting back to it now, and I'm quite excited. All this fits in really nicely, of course, with the Linked Open Data Project as well, because the Linked Open Data Project is the mechanism by which a lot of this data that we're producing can be made available to others and integrated into other projects and so on. But I want to talk about timelines. So the idea of putting together timeline data in a uniquely dynamic and text-linked way came about a number of years ago. Actually, it came about just before Rings of Power came out, hence the meteor shown here. And the idea basically was that if we had timelines, not just in sort of textual form, like you would get in Appendix B or in Complete Guide to Middle-earth, or even in something like Tolkien Gateway. Tolkien Gateway at least is sort of somewhat machine actionable because it is in electronic form. But the idea is if we bring together chronological information in a database, we can do some really interesting sort of dynamic things where instead of being overwhelmed by every single event, we can filter it in interesting ways. And so I had started 2 years ago doing this for Second Age events in the Tale of Years. And you know, this is, for example, a list of events that the Tale of Years in Appendix B talk about happening in the Second Age. But they can be categorized in different ways. Some of them have to do with births, deaths, and marriages. Some of them have to do with conflicts and battles. Some of them have to do with construction and settlements, right? What would be really nice to do, and it's not implemented yet, but this is the intention soon, of being able to sort of filter down just the events that meet certain criteria. Ones that relate to particular people. Like if you just want to see a timeline of Sauron, or you just want to see a timeline of Aragorn, or you just want to see a timeline of Elrond or something like that, being able to immediately filter out all of the events. Things that relate to a particular region, for example. So there's a lot of work to do here in terms of coming up with the categories and tags and the structure of the events and so on. And as I said, the goal is to build some interactive timelines and to publish this information freely as part of the Linked Open Data Project. This is another great place if people want to get involved. This is just sort of starting out. I have some a document that I wrote a couple of years ago outlining some of the issues to do with modeling dates, but also how we sort of tag events and so on. But there's a lot of stuff to decide here. So if you are interested in contributing to this, that would be a wonderful, wonderful place to get involved, because we need to start having lots of discussions about how do we classify different events. Some of them are really obvious, like, Aragorn was born here on this date or something like that. But it gets fuzzier when you some of the descriptions, even if we go back here, Sauron chooses Mordor as a land to make into a stronghold. What kind of event is that? Because it doesn't say you're right. The next one is he begins building of the Barad-dûr, but the choosing Mordor is a sort of interesting event. How do we classify that? So a lot of discussions there. If you're interested in sort of that taxonomic thinking and how we're going to categorize all this, the plan is to basically do initially work through two chronologies that we have. One that I'd already started on 2 years ago was the Second Age Tale of Years, which you can see here. The other that I think makes sense is it's interesting, and it ties in with some stuff I'll get to in a moment, is the Annals of Beleriand, the very first version of the Annals of Beleriand in Volume 4 of the History of Middle-earth. I think it's interesting to do alongside the Second Age Tale of Years just because it's a very different kind of document. It's a different period of time. It involves different people and places and so on. And also, as I'll get to, as I said in a moment, there's a bunch of stuff that I've started doing on History of Middle-earth, starting with Volume 4. So again, if you are interested in contributing, this is a great place to do it. Just let us know in the Discord if you are interested in getting involved in all of the discussions around modelling chronologies and timelines. Some of the stuff that we do within the secondary world will also then be applicable to the way that we model things in Tolkien's own life as well, which is another part of the sort of larger Digital Tolkien Project, is doing that kind of modelling of the primary world chronologies as well. But we're going to start off within the timeline subproject focused on the Second Age Tale of Years and the Annals of Beleriand, the very first version of that in the History of Middle-earth, Volume 4. Okay, talking of the History of Middle-earth, another thing that I want to talk about, which is really the last sort of directly Digital Tolkien Project related thing, and then I've got a couple more things to share, including some book acquisitions, and that is getting back to the sort of structural markup of the History of Middle-earth. And, you know, I've worked on this on and off for a long time, and done a lot of really sort of detailed low-level work. But for a variety of reasons, I think it makes sense for us to have some high-level, broad overview of History of Middle-earth structure work done. I did a bunch of stuff for pedagogical purposes when I was teaching History of Middle-earth in 2023. I taught a year-long course through the History of Middle-earth, 1 volume per month. But I want to sort of move that to more data-oriented kind of stuff. And I'm starting that with Volume 4 of the History of Middle-earth. The main reason that I'm starting with, decided to start with Volume 4 is in many respects I view Volume 4 as a good origin point, because you can view then the first 3 volumes as earlier versions and everything after that as later versions. And it's kind of this nice foundational starting point. It's when Tolkien first wrote a version of the Quenta Silmarillion, of the Silmarillion story. He obviously had versions before that, and he went on to write later versions of it and so on. But it's a really good sort of starting point, reference point for many of the texts and ideas. And so that's what we're starting with. One of the things that makes working with History of Middle-earth different from working with Lord of the Rings or even the published Silmarillion is that in the case of the published Silmarillion, Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, you've got a single narrative text. In the case of Unfinished Tales and the History of Middle-earth, those are works in their own right, but they are also containers for versions of text. And you can view them as works in their own right, but you can also view the individual text. So you can talk about the History of Middle-earth Volume 4, but you can also talk about the Sketch of the Mythology or the first version of the Annals of Beleriand as their own kind of text. And there's a lot of nuance there with regard to sort of teasing out the manuscript transcriptions that Christopher's done, and then obviously there's notes and commentaries and stuff like that, which are really important to separate. There's a lot of cases where if you're searching for a particular word or something like that, if you're searching in History of Middle-earth, you don't know if it's Tolkien using that word or Christopher using that word. And sometimes for a variety of different research questions, it's important to know. And so knowing what parts of the text, the electronic text, are Christopher versus his father is really important. And I'd done a lot of that over the years, sort of very bottom up. But we've just now started doing doing it at top down. And this is also something that Jenny Starstuff has been helping with. I want to show you sort of the approach that that we've been taking there. So let me just switch to a browser. So one of the things that I recently did was basically take all of the EPUBs, the ebooks, and break them down the way that the things are structured in the EPUBs. And so if we go to something like The Shaping of Middle-earth, this is just the way that it's broken down in the files that are sitting on your Kindle or your Kobo or whatever. But it turns out that other than the sort of very highest level table of contents, the structure is largely not represented in the underlying EPUB. And just to give an example of that, if I drill down into the prose fragments following the Lost Tales, so this is an analysis that I wrote some software to break apart the EPUBs and do this. These are the kind of individual chunks, if you like, of this chapter of Volume 4 in the History of Middle-earth. And one of the things you'll notice, this is a completely flat structure. There's just 39 chunks. Some of them are headings, some of them are paragraphs. But if you're familiar with that particular chapter, or you can see it here, the prose fragments following Lost Tales, there's actually 3 examples that are given, that Christopher gives. And they all have a heading, right? So there's this 1 here, and then if we scroll down, there's a 2 here, and there's a 3 here. So in other words, there are 3 things within 3 sections within this chapter. And that's typographically represented in the printed book and on the Kindle, but it's not. There's no underlying structure in the files that breaks things up that way, and that's really awkward. It makes it very difficult to extract particular texts and have a sense of sort of a deeper table of contents. And so one of the things that Jenny's been working on is basically helping to map these kind of structures to these chunk numbers, and that will make it possible to do really interesting visualizations of the components of History of Middle-earth, and then to sort of do interesting contextual searches and all sorts of things. So that's quite exciting work that's just starting out. I do want to tell one little anecdote about this, though. So one of the first things that I did once we had the History of Middle-earth Volume 4 further along was I thought, it'll be really interesting to compare the text in the History of Middle-earth Volume 4 to the published Silmarillion, to see how much of the published Silmarillion comes from the versions of the texts that are in the History of Middle-earth 4. I didn't think there would be much. To my surprise, lots and lots of text came up. There were all sorts of passages in the published Silmarillion that were identical to passages in the History of Middle-earth Volume 4. And I got excited for a moment, and then I realized they were almost all in cases where Christopher quotes the published Silmarillion in his commentary in the History of Middle-earth Volume 4. So it's not that Christopher used his father's texts that are in History of Middle-earth Volume 4 in producing the published Silmarillion. It's that just in his commentary in the History of Middle-earth Volume 4, he says stuff like, well, this version that I've just given you is completely different from the version that's in the published Silmarillion, which reads ... So a cautionary tale there, but it serves to emphasize the importance of separating Christopher's words, even when he's quoting his father, or even maybe especially when he's quoting his father, from the original manuscript, typescript transcriptions that Christopher's presenting. So one of the things that will come out of the current homework is separating that more cleanly across all 12 books, which will be particularly exciting because it will lead to a lot of interesting analyses that we'll be able to do once that's done. Okay, that's it for directly Digital Tolkien Project related stuff. I'm going to just quickly do some book acquisitions because some books have come in over the last 3 months since the last one. First of all, an acquisition from Tom Ayling. And this is my second acquisition from the Library of Judith Tolkien, Michael Tolkien's daughter. I previously showed you her Concise Oxford Dictionary. This is her Greek lexicon, her Little. One of the editors of this dictionary was the famous Greek scholar Little, who was interested, just as a side note, was his daughter, Henry Little's daughter was Alice Little, who was the inspiration for Alice in Wonderland and Alice Through the Looking Glass. That Alice is based on Alice Little, who was the daughter of the editor, one of the editors of this. This is just the Little version. Some of you will be familiar with the LSJ, big, massive 19th century Greek lexicon that's still used today. There's an intermediate one that's called the Middle Little, and this is called the Little, the very small version. And just as another little side note, it's funny because in my other life outside of working with Tolkien, I work with ancient Greek, and I do a lot of work on the digital versions of the Little Scott Jones dictionary, the LSJ. And so I do both Greek digitization and Tolkien digitization, but this sort of combines the two, which is one of the reasons why I had to buy this. This is also fun because even though it's got Judith's name on it and it's got a book plate with Judith's name from 1966, this book is actually from 50 years earlier, and it had been used by many people prior to her, and a lot of them like scribbled. There's dates here from 1917, for example. Students that previously used this book. So anyway, that's one of the purchases that I recently made. Another one, courtesy of I thank Carl Hofstadter for making me aware of the availability of these. You heard me talk before about Joseph Wright, one of my heroes, and I still plan to do a video about his English dialect dictionary. But after he died, his wife wrote a 2-volume biography about him. And I had only ever owned sort of a facsimile copy of it, but Carl pointed me to somebody that was selling the original biography of Joseph Wright, The Life of Joseph Wright, by E.M. Wright, his wife. Another proud possession in my collection of Joseph Wright related books. Another much newer, that's from the 1930s, a much newer acquisition. The book itself only just came out this year, and that's Simon Horrobin's book, C.S. Lewis's Oxford, which, even though it's not, it's a C.S. Lewis book, obviously it talks about Tolkien quite a bit. And I would recommend this if you're interested in knowing more about C.S. Lewis's time in Oxford, but also his relationship with Tolkien while he was there. This book just came out. There is a wonderful YouTube video of Simon giving a talk about this book at Magdalen College a month ago, and during that lecture, he showed a textbook that C.S. Lewis used for his English philology class, and C.S. Lewis's copy of that book has lots of poems that C.S. Lewis wrote in Old English and in Greek and in Latin and in French, poking fun at the professor who wrote the textbook. And I have not acquired C.S. Lewis's version, but I did acquire, they were going quite cheaply, 2 different editions of the same book. So this is A Short History of English by H.C. Wilde, who C.S. Lewis was studying this at the same time as Tolkien was at Leeds, so they didn't overlap. Obviously, Tolkien came back then to Oxford and was a colleague of Wilde, as C.S. Lewis became as well. But Tolkien was at Oxford, at Leeds, when C.S. Lewis was learning from this book. I got 2 editions, so the original edition was 1914, and then the second edition was 1921, and it's the 1921 that we know C.S. Lewis had, but I got both of them. I still need to work out. It's entirely possible, of course, that Tolkien studied this book. I need to check actually Tolkien's library to see if he had this in his possession. But I do want to trace sort of whether Tolkien studied with Wilde when he was an undergrad or not. The final acquisition that I want to mention is one that I think came from Trotter, came from his big sale with Tom Ayling, and that's the 1976 deluxe edition of The Hobbit. I had the Lord of the Rings version equivalent to this for a while, but I was excited to see this. Trotter, if this was yours, I hope you're happy that it's gone to a good home. The 76 deluxe edition of The Hobbit, I'll just take it out of the box just to show you. So this is the book itself. And beautifully typeset with color illustrations throughout, and the maps in beautiful condition. So thank you, Trotter, if this was yours, for looking it after so well, and it's now at another good home. Of course, I don't have the chat open to tell if you're watching. Okay, let me finish off with a couple more announcements. One is that Westmoot, the first Tolkien Society conference in the US, is on in less than 3 weeks, or 3 weeks. Actually, it starts, I guess, exactly 3 weeks, I should say. And I will be talking there about the Digital Tolkien Project we'll see. The program hasn't been finalised yet exactly when I'll be speaking, but I'm looking forward to sharing more details about the Digital Tolkien Project and talking to other people about it at Westmoot in Kansas City, Missouri in 3 weeks' time. Another thing that I'll just quickly mention is that I am going to be co-hosting the Prancing Pony podcast again shortly. I actually will be starting to record at the end of this month, just before I go off to Kansas City. And I'm going to be working through a few of the appendices with Alan, basically appendices B through F. So that'll be exciting. I specifically requested that I get to do those. So obviously Appendix E and F, but even D, the calendar stuff in D and the timeline stuff in B. It's all relevant to the sort of things that we do at the Digital Tolkien Project. So that's going to be a lot of fun co-hosting those episodes of the Prancing Pony podcast. And then the last thing that I will mention is I am teaching my space class, the Signum Adult Continuing Education program. I'm in June. I'm going to be teaching my Tolkien's Invented Languages in the Lord of the Rings course throughout June. This is a course where we basically forget everything that we know about the invented languages from outside the Lord of the Rings and just imagine that all we had was Lord of the Rings, and how much can we work out about how Elvish works just from Lord of the Rings, which is basically the situation that people were in the second half of the 50s and 60s and so on. And so it's a really fun way of kind of dipping your feet in the water of Elvish and so on. I describe it as a collaborative puzzle-solving adventure, because we just sort of look at the names of places and we look at a few poems and greetings and stuff like that and see what we can glean from that about the way the language works. Now, that's in June, but on May 3rd, I'm actually giving a free hour sampler of that course. So I'm giving the showcase lecture at the Space Showcase on the 3rd of May. And if anyone's interested, I encourage you to sign up for that. As I said, it's free, and it'll be a 1-hour taster of the 8-hour course if you're interested. Okay, so I will finish up now, other than just as a reminder, if you're still watching, to get your votes in at the Tolkien Society Awards. Regardless of who you vote for, they're all wonderful people that have been shortlisted, and of course there's the other categories as well. There's some wonderful stuff there. So thank you very much, everyone. I'm sorry for the technical difficulties at the start. I have no idea how the recorded version is going to turn out, and I don't know if people missed out or whatever. We'll sort it out later. But thank you very much if you stuck with it this long. And I encourage everyone to join the Discord if you're interested in following more of what's going on and potentially getting involved with stuff. So hope to see you there or in the next video. Thanks, everyone.